90 seconds. That's how long it took for the Buckmore Park 24-hour race to sell out when it opened for booking. I was actually streaming the GTA 6 trailer breakdown at the time and had to stop in the middle of my stream to get booked on, but I was nevertheless successful. And so began the journey of a bunch of guys from the northeast of England racing in one of the biggest and almost certainly most covered online kart races in the world. This video is brought to you by you. Thank you so much for simply being here and enjoying my content. Please do leave a comment, like the video, and consider subscribing if you haven't already for a chance to see your name here in a future video. So let's get straight to it. On Friday the 26th of April 2024, I drove all the way from the northeast of England to the southeast, about a 6-hour drive, to the location of the first ever 24-hour race that I'd participate in real life anyway. I met up with my teammates at the track and we were able to walk around it before all the action was set to start the day after, and that was pretty helpful to do since coming into this event, 4 of us out of 6 had never been to Buckmore Park before, with one of the other 2 having only been once and the other having a 20-year gap between visits. And if it wasn't lacking experience enough, only one of us had ever done a 24-hour race before. So we really were jumping in at the deep end on this one. We got to a very packed circuit on Saturday morning and went through the usual driver briefings and such before starting 90 minutes of practice. Split between the 6 of us, that was 15 minutes each, and for most of us that meant 15 minutes to figure out how to drive a brand new track, in addition to figuring out how we were going to manage driver changes and pit stops. The qualifying happened at the end of the practice session, and after that we'd be lining up on the grid in 16th place out of 30 teams. Speaking of teams, now would probably be a good time to introduce mine. First of all, we've got Denham Smith, otherwise known as Smithy112, when he used to race with us in GTA back in the day in things like the Multi-Class Endurance Championship, as well as Callum Cleet, who's the G-Fred enjoyer who came up with the new lineup Chiliad on the east of the map. Then we've got Andrew Penfold, who I raced with back in 2014 and always finishes high in our local championship, and Tom Shipman, who has a lot of racing experience behind him as a driver and more. Finally, Kevin Hunter, who has been racing longer than all of us and was responsible for getting our awesome hats and jackets, which I needed to get a logo made up for with our team name of 1322 Racing, thanks to Catalyst for that. More info on how you can get some 1322 Racing merchandise will be later on in the video, so keep an eye out for that. But as simple as it was, those jackets and caps really helped us feel like a proper team during the weekend, and also came in handy during the terrible weather. Be sure to check out Kevin's garage if you're in the Newcastle area. Now, Tom and Smithy have both raced at a very high level in UK karting in years gone by, while Callum used to also do owner-driver racing alongside Tom at our local track. Andrew and Kevin have done a wide variety of karting themselves over the years, including superkarts for Kevin, and I've raced with Andrew, Callum and Smithy in our local championship in this real-life racing series back in 2014 and 2015, where we all locked out the top spots of the championships in those years, while I've raced with Kevin and Tom more recently since my return to the championship in 2023. And then there's me, who didn't start racing properly competitively anyway until 2013 really at the age of 23, has only ever raced hire karts and had a long break from karting between 2016 and 2022. We had quite a mix of experience levels, but also with us all being frontrunners at the local championship that you regularly see in this series, we were hoping that we could at least do better than being also rans. Naturally, because of our relatively low experience of 24-hour events and track knowledge, in addition to our different experience levels in general across the team, we were in the rookie class for the event, which meant that we had something to fight for even if we were out of contention for the overall race win. So, like I said earlier, we lined up on the grid in 16th place overall and 4th place in the rookie class after Tom qualified us there with a time that was basically right in the middle of the just 1 second gap that separated 1st place from 27th. Incidentally, there was only 0.06 of a second separating the top 2 and 1/10 of a second between 1st and 7th. Qualifying was all very, very close, and that was how the race was going to go as well. So as the race started, everything settled down and Tom had a really hard stint with constant battles to gain positions and places to get us up to 12th place by the end of his 2 hours. In all of the shots that you see today, we're in kart number 24, so it's plate number 24 that you need to keep an eye out whenever I'm showing us out on track. We were planning between 1.5 and 2 hour stints for each driver, so at the end of the 2 hours, Tom came in and handed over to Smithy. One problem that we realised though was that we weren't the only ones on this every 2 hour strategy, since that's how long the fuel could theoretically last. So we'd lose time on a lot of our pit stops because we'd come in behind another team and have to wait for them to fuel up before we could. Definitely something to think about for the future as an area for improvement. Anyway, not long into Smithy's stint, it started to rain, and we got to witness one of the best drivers in the entire field in those conditions do some wonderful things. Smithy was an absolute monster, setting lap times that were faster than the overall leaders, and generally doing some of the things that he was known for back in his younger days of high-level karting. There was one point where the commentators were just talking about how good Quadrant's Super GT was in those conditions. Then, just after that, Smithy went and overtook him.
That's it. We look at the Quadrant kart, then Steve Brown behind the wheel at the minute. He's just getting into a rhythm with his stint. He's got right behind him on circuit there. Kart number 24, second in the rookie class at the moment, the 1322 Racing North East squad. And I love this shot here as they float their way down the hill.
Oh,
it's awesome. So just see the back end stepping out. Well, I was going to say a little bit. Flipping heck. 1322 Racing North East. We're facing Southwest then. Finally, I got that put in.
Yes.
Been waiting so long. 2.5
Where's the
hours
party
for
popper?
That.
We had a
no,
party
don't
popper.
mention party poppers to me. Someone aimed one at my head last night, and I'm still getting flashbacks. But we've got great pace out of that rookie team, to be fair, the Racing North East squad. He's overtaken Steve after I bigged him up to the heavens earlier on. And now they are making tracks in chasing down the Ditch Finders team. 18.3 seconds, about 21 seconds actually between them and the class leaders. There's a little bit of argy-bargy. Steve says, have one of them. There's a kiss with the number 6 as well.
Now, it was all fun and games early on, to be honest. It was pretty cool having the race coverage and live timing and commentary and all that good stuff. You know, we kind of felt like proper racing drivers in a way. Shout out to my regulars from my live stream chat who were having some fun on the official live stream with their Team 1322 messages. And I actually got a little emotional at times looking at all the support that we were having in the chat that was going on. We had a lot of you cheering us on and we saw it and it was lovely to experience. The chat also did get me to go down and do an interview.
I just realised as well, I've been really ignorant to the fact that Kieran is ready for another interview, everybody. I'm so sorry.
That's no problem at all. I was just waiting patiently, Chaz. But anyway, I'm here with Adam Brough from the 1322 Racing North East. Pretty easy for me to say. Currently in the battle for the rookie lead of class. Adam, talk us through it, because this is a track you've told me you've never been to. You've never done a 24-hour race before, and yet here you are, second place in the rookies.
You know what? We've got to give a credit to Smithy, our driver out right now. He's a bit of a monster in the wet, to be honest. So I don't know how it's going to go for the remainder of the race when I get in, for example. But yeah, it's all down to him at the moment. We had a good first stint, and then this is our second stint. He's doing really well. So it's all him so far.
And how are your skills in the wet then?
To be honest, I think the whole team will do relatively better in the wet than they would have done in the dry. We're from the northeast of England, so we get a lot of rain. The track that we normally race on up at Warden Law is not much grip, so I feel like we're kind of in our element here at the moment, to be honest.
Oh, it's great. So, and I mean, you're having a great old battle out there with Ditch Finders. Can you keep that for the next 20 hours or so?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, let's keep it going. It's been incredibly close, and I think Smithy managed to get up behind him, but it's so difficult to find a way past and then stay ahead, because I think the pace is quite similar. So yeah, it will depend on all the rest of all the rest of the drivers in the team, to be honest, whether we can actually keep it. But I didn't expect to be doing this well so early on. So it's nice. It's nice to be up there.
Nice to be up there. Hopefully we can keep a hold of it. But Adam, thank you so much for joining us. Go back with your team. And when can we see you out in the car?
Not until 12:30.
Mark it in your diaries then. 12:30. You'll get to see Adam in the car. Adam, thank you so much for talking to us. I'll hand it back to Chaz.
Thanks very much, Kieran. Smashing stuff. Yes, indeed. Mark it in your diaries for 12:30, so to speak. It's going to be really, really interesting to see how the teams adapt in the dark as well. Obviously, it is floodlit here at Buckmore Park. However, you're still going to be racing at night and in wet weather conditions, so it's going to be very, very tricky.
Just before the end of Smithy's 2 hours, he'd managed to get us into the top 10 overall and into the lead of the rookie class with an overtake that was caught by the broadcast before handing over to Penfold and Cleet, who both put in superb drives to keep us in the fight for the class victory in conditions that simply got worse and worse as the night drew near. So despite all the fun and games, there was a race going on, and with this race they want to make sure that the rookie class is actually made up of rookies. So within the first 6 hours of the race, the organisers have the ability to move teams up or down between the pro and rookie classes if they're doing too well or not doing well enough. That happened to 2 teams that were in front of us in the rookie class after 6 hours, which basically meant that we were back up to the lead in the class, and it quickly became apparent that there were 3 teams in contention for the class victory. So for a long time we were battling with Spicy Boys and Senior Frogs, both teams of which were made up of multiple YouTubers as well. So it was almost like a mini YouTuber class. I know there's a video about this race from one of the Spicy Boys, so I'll leave that link below, and I'll also link any other coverage of this race from the various different teams that were involved in it as they come out, so you can always check the description for that. At nearly 8 hours into the race, we lost the lead to Senior Frogs momentarily, but Callum got it back again and held it until the end of his stint, when we swapped over to Kevin as the rain just continued to fall and make the conditions honestly utterly miserable with the darkness coming in on top of it. Now, there was 2 distinct camps after people finished their stints. You had one end of the scale with people like Andrew, who loved every minute of it and labelled it as one of the best experiences he'd ever had in a kart. And then you had the other end of the scale with Callum, whose exact words when he first got out of the kart were, "I effing hate endurance racing." Although, to be fair, he was pretty badly ill in the week before this event and still feeling the effects of it during it, so he did remarkably well, to be honest. After my first stint, I was definitely closer to Callum's feelings than Andrew's, as we'll see. Because something that I just didn't anticipate or appreciate beforehand was the sheer mental fatigue of basically running the team. Now, we all played our part in helping with that, but I was the team leader and basically constantly thinking about stints, who's on next, fuel stops, overall strategy, how we were doing, and everything else. I couldn't really ever switch off, and I just didn't have the extra capacity to think about anything else, like posting updates to Discord or social media, or even recording footage for the most part. Big thanks to my fellow podcast co-host and iRacing enjoyer Josh Immers, who actually came to the event to support us and watch, because he brought his own cameras, including a little drone, and got a load of great footage that you're going to see throughout the course of this video. I just didn't have the extra space in my brain to think about that. It was honestly all too overwhelming. Other teams had dedicated people for team management and strategy so the drivers could focus on driving. Other content creators had dedicated people for camera work and content so the drivers could focus on driving. I had me. So I'm really thankful to the whole team, to be honest, for taking some of the load off at various times, as well as Josh for being my cameraman when I couldn't do it. And a special shout out to Kevin's dad, who was also there to support us and stay on top of what was going on. So as my first stint approached, I was beginning to get a little bit nervous. It was just after midnight at this point, and I'd been awake since about 7 AM, and with everything that I just mentioned, I was already fatigued before I even got into the kart. So much so that I didn't even get my helmet camera set up for my first stint, so you'll have to go on the outside shots from the broadcast and Josh's GoPro. Not that you'd really have been able to see anything anyway, because I certainly couldn't from inside the visor. Nevertheless, it was time for Kevin to come in, and after putting in a really solid stint in very difficult conditions, I finally got into the kart for the first time, with 10 hours of the race already having been completed. Now, we did it this way so that I'd be the one to finish the race, but in hindsight, it was a mistake. I'm probably the least experienced of everyone in the team, and experience is really what you needed in this kind of situation, given I was going out in very different conditions to practice, with rivers of water running down the track in some places and in the pitch black, when I'd never been around the track before in the wet. And I've got to say, I don't think I've ever experienced anything like it. The outside camera shots really don't do it justice, and if anything, I wish I had my helmet camera on for this first stint, just so I could show you how little that you'd be able to see. It was so wet that I was sliding around on the straights, but you know, I've driven on slick tyres in the wet plenty of times in this series, and a lot of that experience at least allowed me to stay on the track, most of the time anyway, and get up to a not horrific speed pretty quickly. My main problem instead was the fact that for about maybe 60% of the lap, I simply couldn't see where I was going. With a combination of the heavy rain and spray from other karts coating my visor completely, in addition to the darkness where the floodlights couldn't quite get to every part of the track, I felt like I was driving blind a lot of the time. I did the best I could, but I couldn't really get a feel for what I was doing right or doing wrong because I couldn't really see exactly what others were doing who were quicker. And in the few areas where I did see how some of those quicker drivers were taking the corners, specifically on the downhill, I just didn't feel like I had the ability to do that, or I at least didn't want to try it and mess it up too much during the race. If it was practice, I'd have been more willing, but not during the race. And I could feel that my lack of experience in these sort of conditions was making me slower in learning what I needed to do. But that wasn't everything, you know, when it rains it pours. Because at the same time I was out, the other two teams we were fighting with for the lead in rookies had some of their best drivers out. Their most experienced and best in wet conditions drivers. And when I saw them drive past me a few times, my head really started to drop because I knew I was losing us positions, losing us time, and losing us the ability to fight for the win in our class. I just felt hopeless and like I was basically losing us the race. So at the end of a little over 2 hours and 100 laps, this is how my lap times looked. In general, I was pretty inconsistent, probably until the final 10 or so laps where I finally started to figure things out. And the trend line is getting better across all the laps. I was getting quicker over time, slowly but surely. By the end of the 2 hours, I'd learned much better what I needed to do, but the damage was already done at that point as a consequence of having to do that learning in the race itself. My average lap times improved by 2 to 3 seconds per lap over the stint from the start to the end, and towards the end, I'd managed to at least catch some people and have a few battles and make a few overtakes. But it would have been an awful lot better if I was able to start my stint 2 to 3 seconds per lap quicker rather than end it that way. If I'd averaged across the whole stint the lap times I was doing in the final quarter, I'd have been almost 2 laps further ahead than what I ended up being. That's the difference it can make. By having to learn what to do in the race, I lost almost 2 laps of race time while the other teams had their better drivers out, gaining even more than that. Needless to say, by the time I came back into the pits and handed back over to Tom, we'd lost the lead in rookies and were a few laps back in the pack of the rookie class now. And holy hell did I feel horrific after getting out of that kart. It was 3 AM, I'd been awake for 20 hours, I was soaked through to my skin with rain, I was in pain after aggravating a muscle injury in my back that I'd been trying to manage leading up to the race, and I felt so guilty about how badly I'd performed. In reality, looking back at it, it wasn't as bad of a stint as I felt it was at the time. I think a lot of things conspired to make me feel worse than I perhaps should have, with all the stuff I just mentioned in combination with pit stop strategies making it look like we were in a worse spot than we actually were, and the other teams actually having their quicker drivers in, making it look to me on track like I was doing worse than I actually was. It still wasn't great, but given everything and looking back at it, I'm kind of amazed I managed to last a full 2 hours, to be honest. I think the rain helped all of us there, actually, because it was much less physically demanding than it otherwise would have been. It was pretty physical in the dry, even doing those 15 minutes of practice. So after my stint, I left the track to go get some much needed sleep, and the lads did an amazing night stint. Tom and Smithy were out for the rest of the night and actually got us back up to second place in rookies and back on the lead lap, putting us right back into contention with less than a third of the race to go. But on the changeover between Smithy and Callum, Smithy accidentally stood on the transponder on the kart, which is what tracks lap times, and it needed to be fixed before we could go back out. Now, I've never known transponders to be placed on the floor of a kart before, rather than on the nose or steering wheel or somewhere else just much more out of the way. And it's completely understandable how Smithy ended up hitting it, as, you know, he was trying to get out of the kart in a bit of a daze after driving around for 2.5 hours straight. When you've finished a stint like that, you do feel a little bit woozy. But ultimately, it ended up basically undoing all of the good work he did in his stint, as we lost about 3 to 4 laps from that issue. That's the nature of 24-hour races though. Freak accidents can happen, and at that point, our race was basically done in terms of fighting for the top spots, which was a massive shame because Tom and Smithy had done a great job to basically get us back into contention in the first place throughout the night. So as the night turned to morning, Callum and Andrew did some great stints again to get us basically within a lap of third place in class, and Tom went out for his third and final stint. And he really made third place sweat it a bit. We had at least one more pit stop to do to refuel, and third place were trying to make it to the end without stopping, but Tom was nevertheless flying and around a second per lap faster than them. He spent his stint catching up that lap deficit, and he even passed them to get up into third place, which was also an overtake that was caught perfectly by Josh from the side of the track.
16, 24, he's right on him. He is literally right on him. 16, oh, he's going! Go on! Yeah! There you go. That's for third place. Perfect. Oh my god, I could not have positioned myself any better for that. That was amazing.
The other team was so worried that they ended up making a pit stop to put a quicker driver in the kart when they didn't really need to. At least they didn't need to come in and refuel. So it was at least nice to have that final little push towards the end. It didn't really matter though, since like I said, we still needed to do another pit stop for fuel anyway, so we weren't really in contention for that final podium spot. Kevin went out to do his final stint, and during his stint and at the end of Tom's, the rain actually stopped and the track finally started to dry up, to the point where it was likely going to be almost fully dry by the end of the race. Now, during the night, the team had extended their stints a little bit, since my injury meant that I was unlikely to be able to do another 2 hours, so with about 20 minutes to go, Kevin came in and we swapped over one last time. I'd be able to deal with a little bit of pain for 20 minutes in order to finish the race. And so here we are, in the view that you're used to seeing in this series, as I head out for the final 20 minutes of the race. This kart had been driven around this track for 23.5 hours by 6 different drivers, and it was up to me to get us across the line. And those numbers on the screen just look kind of ridiculous in terms of the lap counts. It just doesn't make sense that we're on lap 1295 out of 1316. Just for clarity, those are the number of laps that we did. The leaders and other teams did different numbers of laps, but for the sake of keeping it as straightforward to watch as possible, I figured I would just, put as many laps as we did so you know where we're at and what lap we're on and how close we are to the finish. But you might also be able to see that the track was basically dry. It was a little bit damp in some places and certainly not as grippy as it was at the very start of the race, but it was dry lines basically everywhere. And not since my 15 minutes of practice more than 24 hours ago, where I was in the wrong seating position anyway, so I had no balance and couldn't learn much, had I been out on track in the dry. And half of the team didn't get to experience it at all during the race, at least. So it took me a little bit of time to get caught, to get up to speed, although not as long as it did in the wet. Basically, I would say maybe 4 laps is what it took me to get up to a bit of speed. I was experimenting a bit with the lines. I was figuring out where it was still a little bit damp, I think the next lap after this one is the one where I start to actually, you know, I've been dropped a little bit. I was overtaken quite quickly. I didn't really get a chance to settle into the race at any point because I just had karts swamping me all over the place. But it only took me sort of 3 or 4 laps to actually start catching up again and setting some decent pace. But the problem I was obviously going to have was that I was going to be inconsistent, and I do experience that in these first few laps because I'm just, you know, I'm almost learning the track again completely new. Even though I'm kind of have an idea of what I need to do and how I need to do it, actually executing it the same every single lap is not the easiest thing in the world. And this is it's a brand new track to us, brand new karts. It's actually quite bumpy as well, so I had to do quite a bit with the video stabilization for the camera for this one, so hopefully it's good enough anyway. But yeah, I think this was the lap where it all clicked a little bit, and I was able to actually pull away from, pull back in on the people who'd overtaken me earlier on in the race. But then that inconsistency comes in a little bit further around this 4th lap, basically, that I've been out on track. And yeah, you can kind of see where I'm quick, but also I'm not quick every single lap, every single time. But, you know, at this point it doesn't really matter. We're not really fighting for any positions. It's all just to have a little bit of fun in the final stages of the race and, you know, bring it home and cross the line. And this is obviously a part here where I really struggled with the consistency around that corner. Sometimes I'd take it too wide, take a bit too much speed, but also it was sometimes when I hooked it up, it really worked. So yeah, it was just a learning experience again, you know, but 1,300 laps into a race. So we're going to move it on a little bit towards the end of the race with about 4 laps to go, and you can see that, you know, from my lap times on the right hand side I am getting quicker and certainly getting a little bit more consistent with that speed. In the start of the stint I was kind of doing 52-second lap, a few 51s, a 50, then back to the 51s, whereas towards the end of the race and towards the end of my stint it wasn't taking me long before I was able to start setting consistent 50-second lap times. And I actually saw myself catching up to drivers in front for once, which didn't happen very often, and certainly wasn't happening during the wet. There was only really one driver who I was battling with during that point. So seeing myself catch up pretty quickly to Kart 21 here, it was starting to feel pretty good, and I was pretty happy about that. So I set out on a little bit of a redemption run. I wanted to redeem myself for, you know, what I still felt was, at the time, a pretty poor performance during the night. So with not many, you know, there's not many laps left to go in this race, and I knew that the timer was counting down. I at least wanted to get one overtake on somebody, just to say that I'd managed to do that, you know, just for a little bit of redemption from after a terrible night stint. And I was able to do that up the inside, going into the first corner of Kart 21, which was, you know, nice to do. It felt good. It felt good to actually be, you know, feeling like I wasn't totally hopeless at every stage of driving this kart around this track during this weekend. But then I noticed kart number 30 in front of me, and I was catching to that as well. Kart number 30 was the kart for the Quadrant team, which is Lando Norris's creator group. He wasn't there, by the way. And they'd been more focusing on the content side of things, with a very varied mix of experience levels in their team. So they were never really in contention in the rookie class, despite having F2 driver Clement Novalak also racing for them, bizarrely. But when I saw I was catching that team and them, I became even more determined to get one last overtake as time was running out, and I saw that it was the F1 game YouTuber Tiamat Marduk at the wheel, and I was catching pretty decently. I felt like, okay, I gotta do this, I gotta make this stick. So yeah, I needed to make this move before I ran out of time, and it was all gonna come down to this area, whether I could hook it up, and I was so inconsistent on this area. It was nice to finally get a good run out of this right-hander, and I just had to send it up the inside, got the move done, made it stick, and yeah, that sort of marked the end of the redemption, I guess you like. It was a tidy overtake up the inside, and overtaking a fellow YouTuber in the last few laps felt kind of nice. You know, it didn't matter at all to our finishing position. it was purely just to make me feel better, to be honest, and I kind of needed it after having such a terrible stint earlier on in the race in the middle of the night. So yeah, that was nice, and we're going to watch out the final couple of laps here, because they're not very quick laps. It's a shorter circuit than the normal track that we race on as part of this series, but really fun, quite bumpy, with certainly it would have been very physical doing this for the full 2-hour stint, and with my injury, this final stint, even these 20 minutes, was very difficult. But here we are on the final lap. I was actually one of the last to cross the line. The overall race leaders are basically just behind me, maybe by about 5 or 6 seconds, so they would take the checkered flag, or basically they've already taken it at this point. You can probably see them on the right hand side there. They've already taken the checkered flag. The race is over, but I'm on my final lap. Again, none of it mattered for position, none of these overtakes, and at this point we were all stuck in our positions during the race, but it was somewhat of an emotional experience to cross the line. I think we ended up in 5th place in the rookie class and the 18th place overall. 3rd, 4th and 5th place in the rookies were all on the same lap after 24 hours. The Spicy Boys ended up getting the win, with Senior Frogs in 2nd, 1 lap back. We were a further 3 laps behind that, so it's unfortunate that the transponder issue happened, because without that we probably would have been comfortably in 3rd and probably in 2nd, and still potentially even battling for the win, even despite my bad night stint. But you also just don't know what other issues other teams have had that put them in their respective positions as well, so that's just how 24-hour races go. We learned a lot, and in the end we didn't do too badly for our first ever event. We did just miss out on completing 1322 laps though. Shout out to Toby and the Bandits, who did complete exactly that number of laps to finish 10th overall. And that was that. 24 hours of racing done. Like I said, I was one of the last to cross the line, and it was pretty emotional, I think, to actually make it to the end and finish the race and take that checkered flag. We were all tired and we were all in pain, but looking back on it, it was a pretty amazing experience, and even though I didn't feel like it at the time, I'd totally do it all over again with all the things we learned from this first crack at it. Next time I probably wouldn't wait 10 hours for my first stint though. That was a big mistake. I think I definitely would do better getting my first stint out of the way early. But like I said at the start, considering this race sold out within 90 seconds, there's no guarantee we'll ever get the chance to do it again. It'll just be luck of whether we can actually get booked on if we decide to go for it again, which also isn't a guarantee. Nevertheless, it was an awesome weekend, and big thanks to the whole 1322 racing team who made it that way, alongside Josh for his camera work and support even turning up, and Kevin's dad, who used to actually work as a mechanic for a Formula 2 team back in the 70s and 80s, and us doing this event reminded him of the buzz that he used to get back in those days, which was lovely. That's kind of what it's all about, really. And thanks to everyone who watched it live as well. I'm really glad you enjoyed following along, and I'll link a load more coverage of the event down below in the description in case you're interested in seeing the full live stream or other creators' videos. And obviously thank you to Buckmore Park as well for putting on this race. It was a lot of fun. And if you want some 1322 racing merch, you can get it for 1 month starting from this video. Now some of it might come back in the future, but there's no guarantees. There's basically a new drop on the merch store. Go to store.bruffy.com and you'll be able to buy a variety of 1322 racing merch, from t-shirts and things like that, and mugs with the 1322 racing logo, to hats and caps that basically work on a pre-order system. So you'll be able to get a 1322 race team hat in a variety of styles, and whether you want it signed by me or not, there's multiple different options on there. So yeah, check out store.bruffy.com for that. And yeah, hopefully you'll be able to get some 1322 merch and rep the team wherever you are, especially if you go to some real life racing events yourself. But yeah, like I said, it will only be available for this month, so there'll be a little countdown timer at the top of the store to let you know how long you've got. Make sure to get your orders in while you can. Yeah, because there's no guarantee when any of this is going to be back, especially the hats, because I have to basically pre-order those, and I have to get them made specifically for the amount of people who order them. So get your orders in now. But yeah, I think all things considered, we did pretty well, to be honest. We kept it clean by being one of the few teams with no black flags throughout the whole race. We minimised the amount of pit stops we did, and we stayed in the hunt for victory for quite a while, and ultimately got a top 5 in class for a team who had never before done a 24-hour race, and when most of us hadn't raced the track before ever. So you can't really complain at that, but more so than anything, we just had a great time and had a lot of fun. I guess we just got to go back next year and win it now. So thank you all so much for watching. Let me know all of your thoughts about this one down below in the comments, and I'll see you in the next real life racing video soon.